Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with today's Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shabbat. We are up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Aleph. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbaev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. Before beginning today's Mishnah, I wanted to share with you the introduction that's brought down in the art school, elucidated before beginning chapter 2. It's very informative. It'll help us understand what's going on in this chapter. We know that the rabbis decreed that one must kindle at least one light shortly before Shabbat in the room where the nighttime meal will be eaten, as Rashi explains in Masechet Shabbat, page 25b. He explains that this law falls under the general requirement to accord honor to Shabbat, Kvod Shabbat. In order to honor Shabbat, one must eat an important feast, and all feasts of importance are conducted in lit places. Tosfot there on the same page in Masechet Shabbat, page 25b, gives a different reason. He says the obligation to kindle a Shabbat light stems from the mitzvah of enjoying Shabbat, not honoring Shabbat, but enjoying Shabbat, owning Shabbat, because without light, a person does not enjoy his meal. Now, it's also a mitzvah to light the other rooms in one's home so that people do not stumble in the dark. But nevertheless, the primary requirement is to light the room where one eats. And therefore, the Mishnah Berurah explains in Siman 263, Sif Katan 2, that the blessing for the mitzvah is recited upon lighting the lamp where the meal is held. Another practical difference is that the light in the place where one eats must be lit for the sake of Shabbat. If a light was already burning, one should extinguish it and relight it for that purpose. But as for the other rooms in the house, it suffices that they are lit. There's no requirement to kindle lights there specifically for Shabbat, as the Rama says in Siman 263, Halacha 4. Maran brings down in Shulchan Aruch, Siman 270 in Cheduk Or Chaim, Halacha Aleph, that it's a custom in many communities to recite this chapter of Mishnah before Arvit on Friday night, because it contains the laws of lighting the Shabbat lights and related matters. We will begin now with the Mishnah. The Mishnah begins by discussing which types of wicks and oils may be used for the lights that burn in one's house on Shabbat. Bameh madlikin ubama en madlikin. With what types of wicks and oils may we kindle Shabbat lights, and with what types of wicks and oils may we not kindle Shabbat lights? The Mishnah is going to first list now substances that may not be used as wicks. En madlikin lo belechesh. We may not kindle Shabbat lights with the fibers of a cedar tree. As the Rav explains, these are the wool-like woody fibers found between the bark and the wood of a cedar tree. Velo bechosen, nor with uncombed flax, which Mefarshim explain, after stems of the flax plant from which linen is made have been crushed, they are combed with a metal brush. So the Mishnah is referring to a wick made from flax that has not yet been combed. Velo bechalach, nor with kalach, which the Rav says is an inferior type of silk. Velo biftilat aidan, nor with the fibers of a willow tree, which the Rav explains, wool-like woody fibers found between the bark and the wood of a willow tree is not acceptable. That's biftilat aidan. Velo biftilat midbar, nor with fibers of the desert, which the Rav explains is a long grass found in the desert. Its blades can be braided and used for wicks. Velo virokash al pnei hamayim, nor with simas, literally green substance on the surface of the water, which refers to the dark green moss that grows on the bottom of moored boats, as the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbat, page 20b. These materials are disqualified from use as wicks in Shabbat lamps because they do not produce a steady flame. And the Mefarshim explain the rabbis forbade using wicks that do not produce a steady flame because they are concerned that if the flame flickers on Shabbat, a person might unthinkingly tilt the lamp to move more oil to the wick to make the flame brighter or to prevent it from going out, and that would be biblically forbidden under the melacha of mav'ir, lighting a fire. The following substances may not be used as fuel. Velo bezefet, we may not kindle Shabbat lights with molten pitch. Velo b'shava, nor with molten wax. Now the Mishnah prohibits only liquid wax. Candles made from solid wax burn evenly and can be used, as the Rav writes, and as the Mishnah Berurah writes in Siman 264, Sif Katan 24. The Mishnah continues, Velo b'shemen kik, nor with cottonseed oil, v'lo b'shemen srefa, nor with oil that must be burned, which is referring to oil of teruma that became tameh, which has to be burned, v'lo v'aliyah, nor with the fat of a sheep's tail, v'lo b'chelev, nor with chelev, which chelev we know the Torah says in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 7, pasuk 23. Chelev refers to the types of animal fat that are biblically prohibited for consumption. Now, with the exception of oil that must be burned, these substances are disqualified because they do not produce a steady flame. Oil that must be burned, which we said oil of terumah that became tameh, which has to be burned, that may not be used only when Friday is a Yom Tov, and the reason for its disqualification is that burning terumah, which is tameh, is forbidden on Yom Tov. And the Mefarshim give us the background. Terumah is the part of one's crop, commonly a 50th, that the owner must set aside and give to a kohen. If terumah became tameh, which is ritually impure, it may not be eaten, but it must be destroyed by burning. So for this reason, terumah oil that became tameh is called shemen tzerefa, oil that must be burned. Now, burning such oil is forbidden on Yom Tov. Therefore, if Friday is a Yom Tov, one may not use it as fuel in a Shabbat lamp. Nachum Hamadi says, Madlikin bechelev mevushal. We may kindle Shabbat lights with boiled chelev, because when chelev is boiled, it becomes a liquid that can produce a steady flame. Only solid chelev that has not been boiled is forbidden. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, echad mevushal ve'echad she'enu mevushal en madlikin bo. Whether it is boiled or not, we may not kindle with it. Now, the sages agree that boiled liquid chelev produces a steady flame, but there's a concern that people might think that if liquid chelev is permitted, so is solid chelev. So to prevent people from making this mistake, all forms of chelev were forbidden. Now the Mefarshim do point out the Tana Kama, the first Tana of the Mishnah, he simply said we cannot use chelev without any qualification, which implies that he forbids chelev in all forms. He says lo bechelev, which implies all types of chelevs. Therefore, it seems from the Mishnah that the sages are just repeating the view of the Tana Kama. But the Gemara, Masechet Shabbat, page 24b, explains there's a difference between them. They disagree about using boiled chelev into which a small amount of permitted oil was mixed. The Gemara adds, however, that it's not clear who permits its use and who forbids it. But there is a difference between the opinions, and the Rav tells us, V'alacha kechachamim, the halacha follows the opinion of the chachamim, that we said whether it is boiled or not, we may not kindle with it. Now, like I said, we don't know. The Gemara points out there's a disagreement about using boiled chelev into which a small amount of permitted oil was mixed. But like the Rav tells us, Lo nitbarer lechachmei Talmud mi mishneh ha'oser u'mi ha'matir. We don't know who allows it, who forbids it, but we know that this is the opinion of the sages. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet now continues. Now that we discussed that oil that must be burned, shemen tzrefa, terumah oil that became tameh, may not be used as fuel in a Shabbat light, the Mishnah states the reason. En madikin b'shemen tzrefa b'yom tov. On Yom Tov, we may not kindle any light with oil that must be burned, which is terumah oil that became tameh, because it is prohibited to burn terumah that is tameh on Yom Tov, as the Mefarshim explain, midoraita, according to biblical law. If a sacrificial offering becomes tameh and must be destroyed by burning, it may not be burned on Yom Tov, as the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbat, page 24b. So the rabbis extended this prohibition to include terumah that is tameh. Therefore, when Friday is a Yom Tov, such oil may not be used as fuel even in a Shabbat lamp. Rabbi Yishmael says, En malikin be'itran mipnei kavod Shabbat. We may not kindle Shabbat lights with itran, because burning itran produces an extremely foul odor, which does not befit the honor of Shabbat. Now, what is itran? The Mefarshim explain, itran is the residue of pitch. Now that's according to the Rav. According to Rashi, Masechet Shabbat, page 20b, it's a clear, oily liquid in contrast to pitch, which is thick. But again, like the Mishnah says, burning itran produces an extremely foul odor. That does not befit the honor of Shabbat. If itran is used to light the room where the meal is held, the participants might leave the room because of the foul odor and eat in a place that's not lit, and therefore would fail to observe the mitzvah of honoring Shabbat. Now, Rabbi Yishmael specifies this reason, the honor of Shabbat, because that's the only basis for prohibiting itran. The reason that the fuels listed in the previous Mishnah are disqualified, namely that one might tilt the lamp, That does not apply to Itran because its flame does not flicker. Therefore, Rabbi Shmuel had to say it's because of Kavod Shabbat. V'chachamim matirim b'chol hashemanim. But the sages permit kindling with all types of oils. B'shemen shumshemin with sesame oil, b'shemen egozim with nut oil, b'shemen tznonot with radish oil, which is oil extracted from the seeds of radishes, b'shemen dagim with fish oil, b'shemen pakuot with pakuot, the Rav explains, is a member of the gourd family with that kind of oil, b'itran with itran, ubeneft and with neft, like itran, neft gives off a bad odor when burned. But nevertheless, the Mefarshim explained the sages permit both of these fuels because contrary to Rabbi Shmuel, they are not worried that the odor might drive people away from the room in which the Shabbat meal is conducted. Now, although Rabbi Shmuel prohibits itran for this reason, the Tosfot and Masechet Shabbat, page 25b, right, he concedes, he agrees that neft is permitted because its smell is not quite as bad. Now, the Mefarshim deal with the way that the Chachamim said their statement, right? The Mishnah says, "V'chachamim matirim b'chol hashemanim." The sages permit all types of oil, but the sages do agree that all the substances listed in the previous Mishnah are forbidden because they do not produce a steady flame. So even though it says all, they agree to the previous Mishnah that those substances are forbidden. Furthermore, the sages prohibit two fuels that even they agree would cause people to leave the room. These are balsam oil and white neft, which produces sparks that frighten people, as the Rav explains. Now, only white neft is forbidden, but all other forms of neft are permitted, like they write, ubeneft. Rabbi Tarfon says, En madlikin ela b'shemen zayit bilvad. We may not kindle with anything except olive oil. Rabbi Tarfon requires the use of olive oil because it is drawn to the wick more easily than all other oils, therefore producing the clearest, most beautiful flame. Now, even those who disagree with Rabbi Tarfon and allow the use of other oils, they concede that olive oil is the preferred way to light the candle, as Tosfot writes in Masechet Shabbat, page 23a. And that is then, Rabotai, of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.